Hello and good day. 25th of April 2022, just a little after 10:15. I'm just going to get into the stream and we shall begin. Today's show is entitled Syncretism, Spiritualism, Soul, Golgotha, the Christ in Jesus, Satan's Carnival. So as we approach the end of April, as it is the 25th, it will culminate on the 30th as we head into the summer, and as I head into my 44th rotation of the sun. Yes, man's getting to the middle-aged denominations. I would like to continue this video series, Highway to Heaven Part 2. It's going to be a big one. I have a document to read from, 39 pages, 21,500 words, without my splintering off and additional comments, focusing on the rebirth, Easter itself. I would like to say thank you to those that have messaged regarding the last video we did, the content. Thank you for the praise, as it is, for the Highway to Heaven Part 1 that I did, I think last week. I will turn on the camera and I will show you exactly where that is. I've set the video up a little bit differently so I can have the lamb and the lion there. Hello, what? I have an issue with lighting, so forgive the low resolution that I may be in today. Should be 1080p as always. But before we begin, I would like to let you know where the first part of this video is, and share with you that, so then you know. Okay, very good. I'm here. Patience is a virtue. If you go to Indiglo video lists homepage, and in the most recent video there, Highway to Heaven, Spiritualism and Mysticism, Metaphysical Easter Special, that's with myself, Claire and Kevin, 17th of April. Pay particular attention to the first hour of that video and the information presented within. Okay, and once you've finished that, then I would come back and watch this video, or you may just want to watch this video and then go and watch the first one. I have a playlist I'd like to share with you as well that's called the Heliocentric Bibliothèque. He says famously, there we go. Man in a shirt in Hungary. So the Heliocentric Bibliothèque, decoded Bible studies, and there are 58 videos in there, all surrounding sovereignty, Bible, codes, papacy, prophecy, Rome, pagans, Bibles, creation, tones, phonics, sonics, Latin, Genesis, Paradise, Santos Bonacci, Crucifixion, Order, Chaos, Life, Death, somewhat focusing, centralizing around Egyptian methodology, the guiding star O-Ra, waking of the dead, Strawman, gets caught on Mr. Jones's plantation, the ascension, descension of Isaiah, sin and repentance, carpenter and the potter, does the Vatican own thy soul, ancient aliens debunked, removed from playlist, splspro.com, the good news of the gospel. If you don't know what the good news of the gospel is, the go spells, then I'd watch that video as well. 1.5 hours, 92 precious minutes of the governor babbling on. And then last week's video, 3 hours and 21, with myself, Kevin and Claire, Highway to Heaven, Spiritualism and Mysticism. So that's where you'd go to find this kind of related topics, content and material surrounding religion, spiritualism, syncretism, mysticism. And today we're going to start with Rudolf Steiner, Golgotha, the mystery of Golgotha. We're going to look at the Christ in Jesus. Many of you have asked me questions about the wording and the status, standing in capacity I find myself in, coming with Jesus as Christ. Alright, so that will be explained as well for you during today's presentation. So if I may begin, thank you all for joining. Feel free to share, comment. It will be premiered later today, Monday the 25th of April, so welcome to the premiere. Good evening, as it will be in the future later today on this this moon day, the closing of April. So Dr. Rudolf Steiner and the mystery of Golgotha. The Christ unifies. The mystery of Golgotha saved mankind from forces of destruction. And this is taken from a lecture given by Rudolf on May the 7th, 1923, nearly 100 years ago, 1 year short of 100. Steiner discusses the crucifixion of Christ Jesus and the peril of humanity at the time of the mystery of Golgotha. The mystery of Golgotha, for which he has already prepared the ground in recent lectures, will be the subject of the inquiry today. Let us recall the main points for consideration. I mentioned on the last occasion that in order to arrive at a true understanding of the world, we must study the tripartite division of the cosmos and man in the light of the three principles of body, soul and spirit. It is most important to be aware of this fact at the present time, especially in the field of anthroposophy.
Anthroposophy.
Yes, I should like to remind you that this idea of trichotomy forms the central theme of the book titled Theosophy. No doubt you have all read this book and will know that this idea forms the nucleus of the whole book. So whilst we're looking at legal and contrasting that to law, LAW, and contrasting that to LORE, private law, we recognise we have an artificial person and we are going through somewhat of a rebirth ourselves. Each one of the initiates that embarks on this quest for the attainment of higher knowledge and how to use that higher knowledge, somewhat secret, somewhat occult, yes, secret, occult, somewhat crucial for how we exist in this realm of ours today. So these videos and subject matter, content and argumentations from such as Rudolf, Edgar Casey, Alan Watt, Christopher Hitchens, George Carling, many names, you know, that I have been lucky enough to find and work from, standing on the shoulders of giants. I am a giant, ooh, stand upon our shoulders, tell us what you see, I am a giant. Yeah, you are, as to quote Eminem, tune I heard the other day on the telly box, phenomenal, supernatural. So we talk about these topics because we are undoubtedly led to them with regards to the contents of the KJV that we've become familiar with over the course of our discoveries. The authorized version, so authorized means participle passive, warranted by right, supported by authority, derived from legal or proper authority, having power or authority. And I want you to note that by having the title of authorized version, the 1611 King James Bible is literally the legal authority of the legal law of men, aka Mammon. That which the present 2022 New World legal order has been constructed from. And initiates of Indiglo and SPLS Pro do not reference, read and recite the King James Bible because it is a good translation, or more easily it is understandable, rather because it is the book that the London City Templars' current legal, legislative law and private society is based upon. We encourage you all to search out and find the 10 commercial maxims of law and the associated biblical precepts. Other biblical translations are irrelevant for legal purposes. You must not look for an easy to read translation, for that will be a work of mere fiction, and we here at Indiglo, SPLSpro.com, have noted the pretext, the text, the subtext, the narrative and interpretations within the 1611 King James Bible to allow us to be able to find lawful, L-O-R-E-F-U-L, and lawful, L-A-W-F-U-L, remedy, to invoke Christ as remedy. One must learn the language of the authorized version so as to understand what authority is, which is the legal language of the earthly representative, previously known as the Vicar of Christ. Remember, this translation of the king, God in brackets, of the government, God in brackets, and is the evidence, testament in brackets, of law, that all right and authority is claimed by the vicar, the papal crown. So we undoubtedly get led down avenues and rabbit holes when we are researching and doing our due diligence to find out whom and what we are, in order to know ourselves, to know thyself. Pathways and avenues open up, and these areas are critical criteria for us to be able to distinguish what is what. We know what is what, but we don't know what is what. What the bonk, they just strut. So back to Rudolph, and he quotes a passage from his book Theosophy. The spirit is eternal. The body is subject to life and death in accordance with the laws of the physical world. The soul life, which is subject to destiny, mediates between these two, body and spirit, during life on earth. And I reference Ka and Ba with regards to Egyptian mysticism, theology, theosophy. At the time of the publication of his book, he felt it was necessary to define clearly this idea of trichotomy. For by laying special, even decisive emphasis upon this idea, we are really in a position today to understand the cosmos, and at the same time to understand the central event of our earth evolution, the mystery of Golgotha. When we mention cosmos, that would tie into universal law. In his last lecture, he spoke of the solid body of opposition we encounter today when we set out to study both cosmos and man in the light of the threefold principle of body, soul and spirit, not simply as something of secondary importance, but as the central theme of our study. Steiner has shown how the idea of the spirit was lost in the course of the spiritual evolution of the West. I mentioned that the idea of spirit was proscribed by the 8th Roman Catholic Ecumenical Council of Constantinople, and that this proscription not only influenced the development of religious ideas and sentiments, but left a deep impression upon the thinking of recent times. So when we look at Bibles and various editions of Bibles and the New World Testament and civil, administrative, criminal law and reference to Christ or Jesus Christ, we need to look at the, I've done videos on this before. You will find the content in the playlist I showed you at the beginning, the Heliocentric Bibliotech Bible Studies Decoded. And within the 58 videos thereabouts and the contents within, those presentations on our homegrown, grassroots written documents. In consequence, there are a few modern philosophers who are able to distinguish clearly between soul and spirit, and even amongst those who imagine themselves to be objective, one encounters everywhere the dogmatic assertion stemming from the 8th Ecumenical Council that man consists of body and soul alone. He who is familiar with the spiritual life of the West, not only as it is reflected in the more superficial realms of philosophy, but as it has implanted itself in the thinking and feeling of all, even of those who have not the slightest interest in philosophical ideas, sees everywhere the effects of the proscription of the idea of the spirit. And when in recent times a tendency developed to draw upon certain aspects of the wisdom teaching of the East as a corrective to Western teachings, the borrowings were presented in such a light that one would scarcely suspect that the cosmos and man are founded on the threefold principle of body, soul and spirit. So East, beast, be East, when man consciousness, Western man consciousness wanted to learn, they would go East on travels and go on their travels and be enlightened, the search for higher knowledge and the attainment of higher knowledge, and to look at the divinity within cultures, present and extinguished cultures and mythology, and then they would come back from their travels and be a lot more enlightened. For in the division of man into a physical body, etheric body and astral body, derived purely from astral observation, we've got Suthla Sharia, Lingra Sharia, Prana as it was then called, Karma, Karma Manas, and the various other divisions introduced from the East. In all these divisions, which are an arbitrary collocation of 7 principles, there is no indication of what should be regarded of vital importance, namely that our Weltanschauung should be permeated with this idea of trichotomy. That word is
Weltanschauung should be permeated.
Weltanschauung. Weltan, Weltanschauung. So East, be East, beast, be East, beast in itself. There is no doubt that this idea of man's threefold nature has been suppressed. The spirit, it is true, has often been a focus of discussion today, but the discussions are a little more than empty words. People are unable to distinguish nowadays between mere words and realities. Hence many expositions are taken seriously which are little more than a farrago of words, such as the philosophy of Rudolf Eucken. We cannot understand the essential nature of the mystery of Golgotha if we decide to reject the tripart division of man. As I pointed out in my last lecture, the abolition of the spirit was first decreed by the 8th Ecumenical Council, but preparations had been underway for some time. The ultimate abolition of the spirit is connected with the necessary stage in the spiritual evolution of the West. We shall perhaps be able to approach the mystery of Golgotha most easily from the standpoint of the tripart division of man, if we recall how Aristotle, the leading representative of Greek thought, envisaged the soul. So this is part of our own discovery, an independent discovery, and Steiner, I was happy to hear, corroborated what we had found, that the Ecumenical Council, the Church themselves, outlawed and come down heavily on those in the academic areas that dared to talk about the spirit. You could talk about soul, you could talk about consciousness, but you couldn't mention spirit. Alright, so the abolition of talk and subject matter and studies of a spiritual nature. Blavatsky, Madame Helena Blavatsky also talks about the spirit and spirits themselves quite heavily, those that are aware. So we've talked about Aristotle and Aristotelian teachings within equity and trust as well. The Middle Ages were also dominated by Aristotelian philosophy, and though people are unwilling to admit it, Modern thought still draws upon the concepts of the Middle Ages. Furthermore, the latter evolution of thought was already anticipated in Aristotle a few centuries before the mystery of Golgotha, and it was with the help of his ideas that the leading minds of the Middle Ages sought to understand the mystery of Golgotha. These things are of paramount importance, and we must really make an effort to investigate them with an open mind. I mean, no harm, no injury, no malice, no vexation. I don't want to offend anybody. This is just food for thought and material and content which I think is quite critical to you to consider, and in relation to emails, messages and contacts that I get, then further information and referencing is here for you today. What was Aristotle's conception of the human soul? I will tell you as briefly as possible the Greek view of the soul as presented by an enlightened mind such as Aristotle, his conception of the soul. And we have here the views of the most famous European of the 4th century BC, was roughly as follows. When an individual incarnates, he owes his physical existence to his father and mother, but he owes only his physical inheritance to his parents. The whole man, according to Aristotle, could never come into being solely through the union of father and mother, for this whole man is endowed with a soul. Now, one part of the soul, let us remember that Aristotle distinguishes two parts of the soul. It is tied to the physical body, expresses itself through the body, and apprehends the external world through sense perception. The part of the soul arises as a necessary byproduct of man's parental inheritance. The spiritual part of the soul, on the other hand, the active reason, as Aristotle called it, which participates through intellection in the spiritual life of the universe, in the nous, is immaterial and immortal, and could never come into being through parental inheritance, but solely through the participation of God, or the divine, as Aristotle calls it, in the procreation of man through the parents. So we need to reference that there are questions asked, where do souls come from, how else, is there an afterlife when relative has passed on, and the Holy Ghost is given up? Is there something else? Is there a beyond? Is there reincarnation? Is there ascension? A lot of questions come to me through various religious denominations, and asking my interpretation on Abrahamic faiths or Syncretism, Buddhism, things like this as well. It's quite a nice little community chat and interaction that we've got going here, and it's good that questions are being asked, and studies and works and scriptures are being reanalysed and reinterpreted for these reasons. It is thus that the whole man comes into existence. The whole man is born of the cooperation of God with the father and mother. And it is most important to realise that Aristotle understands the word human in this sense. From God, man receives his spiritual soul, or active reason, as Aristotle called it. Active reason, which comes into being with each individual through divine cooperation, evolves during life between birth and death. When man passes through the gate of death, the physical body is given over to the earth, and with the body, the lower part of the soul, the passive reason, in Aristotelian terminology, which is associated with the physical organism. The spiritual part of the soul, the active reason, on the other hand, subsists according to Aristotle, and when separated, appears just as it is, withdraws to a world remote from the phenomenal world, and enjoys immortality. Now, this immortal life is such that the person who performed good deeds whilst in the body is able to look back upon the fruits of his good deeds, but cannot change the karma of his past actions. We only understand Aristotle aright when we interpret his ideas as implying that through all eternity the soul looks back on the good or evil it has wrought. When we talk about conscience, clear conscience, unconscionable behaviour, unconscionable actions, here we go. In the 9th century especially, scholars were at pains to grasp this idea, for the style of Aristotle is economical to the point of obscurity. In his controversy with Eduard Zeller, the late Franz Brentano endeavoured through his life to gather every scrap of evidence which could throw light upon Aristotle's conception of the relationship between the spiritual part of man and the whole of man. Aristotle's views passed over into the philosophy which was taught through the Middle Ages down to recent times, and which is still taught in certain ecclesiastical circles today. Franz Brentano, who was actively interested in these ideas insofar as they stemmed from Aristotle, came to the following conclusion. The mind of Aristotle, which by virtue of its inherent disposition towards reflective thought transcended the limitations of materialism and could not have subscribed to the notion that the spiritual part of the soul was in any way material or could have evolved from man's parental inheritance. There were only two possible ways, therefore, Brentano thought, in which Aristotle could envisage the soul. On one hand, to accept the idea that the spiritual part of the soul was a direct creation of God, working in conjunction with the parental inheritance, so that the spirit part of the soul arose through divine influence upon the human embryo, and this spiritual part did not perish at death, or zygote, embryo, zygote, but entered upon eternal life. What other possibility was open to Aristotle, Brentano asks, if he rejected this idea? And he believed that Aristotle was right to accept this idea. There was only a second possibility, as a third did not exist, and this was to admit not only the post-existence, but also the pre-existence of the soul before birth or conception. So as the world population increases up to 8 billion, 7.98 billion I believe, as of today, the question has also been given to and Greg and I have talked about this in a Zen-like Tibetan Buddhism, Eastern philosophy. Where do the souls come from for the newborns? If reincarnation is a real thing and the world population is expanding, then where are the new souls and spirits and consciousnesses coming from? In some extent, because they must be either created or coming from a repository which may have a limit. Who knows? Here we go. Now, Brentano realised clearly that once we admit the possibility that the soul exists before conception, then we are forced to concede that the soul does not experience a single incarnation only, but undergoes successive incarnations, and since in later life Aristotle rejected paliengesis, i.e. reincarnation, he had no option but to accept creationism, the doctrine that the soul is created ex nihilo with each embryonic life. This accepts post-existence but denies pre-existence. Franz Brentano, who had been a priest, may be regarded as one of the last representatives of the positive side of Aristotelian scholastic philosophy. He thought it was eminently reasonable on the part of Aristotle to reject the doctrine of reincarnation and to recognise only creationism and post-existence. When we look at Buddhism in itself and we look at their views on the soul and the spirit, I've covered that previously. That's an interesting area to cross-reference with Western philosophy and religion. And this view, despite its many modifications, forms the core of all Christian philosophy, insofar as this philosophy rejects the idea of reincarnation. It is a strange phenomenon, both touching and tragic, to see how such an eminent scholar as Franz Brentano, who had resigned from the ministry, resolutely strove to clarify his ideas about creationism, and yet could not bridge the gap which separated him from the doctrine of reincarnation. What was the reason for this? It was evident that despite his profound erudition, despite the vigour and accuracy of his mind, the door to the spirit was closed to him. He could never attain to the idea of the spirit or recognise the spirit as separate from the soul. It is not possible to attain to the idea of the spirit without accepting the idea of reincarnation. The idea of reincarnation is inseparable from the idea of the spirit. In Aristotle's day, the idea of the spirit had already begun to decline. In the key passages of Aristotle's writings, we can observe that when he touches upon the question of pre-existence, he becomes obscure or even ambiguous. You ask yourself now, what is the difference between a soul and a spirit? Very few people can articulately and concisely answer that question. And I think in today's times it is of vital importance, you know, not just because of Easter recently passing and passing in other countries now. I think it's a question, and it's a subject matter which is very complex, very controversial. It has been the subject of suppositions and half-truths and whole lies. The mist was not so dense then as it is now, but the first signs of the corruption of man's thinking in matters of the spirit were already manifest at that time, and this is connected with the fact that in the course of time humanity had undergone an evolutionary process. Over the centuries, man's soul has changed and was no longer the same as it had been in primeval times, because man possessed a knock at the door. Excuse me. What? Intermission. Good day, my love. Hello there.
Right, I just need to take a photo.
Oh, do you? Get my socks out of the way. Alright.
Right, okay. I'll just sign it out.
Alright then. Thank you, my love. I'll get them.
Oh, you've got one of them as well.
Jump me on. Thank you. Ciao. God bless you. Bye bye. You just couldn't Adam and Eve it. Shikaka. We're back. Let me just check the camera. I thought so. Wait there, I can fix that. I do believe. Sorry about that, fam. That says I'm back. I was getting into that as well. That says I'm back. And Tube says I'm back. Put that down there. Back there. Where were we? Evolutionary. Over the centuries, man's soul has changed. Because man possessed atavistic clairvoyance in those remote times, he had direct experience of the spirit. He could no more doubt the existence of the spirit than he could doubt the existence of the phenomenal world. And when we look at clairvoyant, we also need to look at claircognizance as well. When you do something or know something instinctively and you know it's right, or it's what you're being told is wrong and there's a different answer, but without having the academic or evidence to back it up, you have a gut feeling, a feeling. It was simply a question of the degree of spiritual perception he could attain. That it was possible to find the path to the spirit in past ages was never in doubt, nor was there ever any doubt that during the life between birth and death, the spirit dwelt in the souls of men, so that by virtue of this spiritual endowment, the human soul could participate in divine life. And this conviction, which was founded on an immediate awareness of the spirit, was at all times expressed in the cultus of the mysteries. It is a remarkable fact that one of the earliest Greek philosophers, sorry, I've lost my place there, Heraclitus speaks of the mysteries in such a way that we realise he is aware that in olden times they were of immense importance to mankind, but they had already fallen into destitute. Thus enlightened Greeks had already begun in the 5th century BC to speak of the decline of the mysteries. Rites of various kind were enacted in the mysteries, but it is only the central idea of these mysteries which is of particular interest to us today. Let us dwell for a moment on this central idea of the mysteries as they were practiced up to the time of the mystery of Golgotha and as late as the reign of the Emperor Julian the Apostate. In recent times, attention has been called to the anti-Christian nature of many aspects of these mystery cults. It has been pointed out that what we know as the Easter legend, the keynote to the passion, the death and resurrection of Jesus, or even Christ, can be found everywhere in the mysteries. And the conclusion drawn from this was that the Christian Easter mystery was simply a transference of the ancient pagan myth and ritual to the person of Jesus of Nazareth. We also need to draw in, I need to segue that and say, video number 1, Highway to Heaven, that I've showed you, I cover the Gabriel inscription and the Gabriel stone. Okay, so as well as the transference of the ancient pagan myth and ritual to the person of Jesus of Nazareth, we would like to draw in the Gabriel inscription and the Gabriel stone, because in the 1930s, when Steiner was reading and doing these works, that stone hadn't been found until nigh on 80 years later, in 2000, 70 years later, in the year 2000. So I'm updating. When we say continuous improvement and mirroring and working from standing on the shoulders of giants, had Steiner known about the Gabriel inscription stone and had that information to put into, then I believe he would have coherently and competently been able to add that in with the pagan myths there as well. Indeed, these legends and rites were so alike that many no longer questioned their identity and said what the Christians say of Christ, that he suffered, he was crucified and rose again, that his resurrection gave promise of hope and salvation for man. All these Christian ideas are to be found in the mystery cultices. Pagan usages they claimed had been collected together, fused into the Easter legend and transferred to the person Jesus of Nazareth. Indeed, in recent times people have gone even further, strangely enough, even in the sphere of Orthodox Christianity. One need only recall certain Protestant sects in Bremen. There was no longer any interest in the historicity of Jesus. They said that the various mystery cults and legends had been collected over the years and had been centralized, so to speak, and that in the early Christian community the Christ legend had been developed out of them. I recall a discussion which took place here in Berlin a few years ago. During the tragic years of recent times, past events have become unreal and seem a distant memory. A reference to the Second World War, I do believe. Although the discussion took place only a few years ago, in the course of this discussion the official representatives of Christianity declared that the real issue was not the historical Jesus, but simply the idea of Christ, which arose in the primitive Christian community through the impact of diverse social impulses. So that's an important paragraph there. Alright, who are the official representatives of Christianity and how did they get appointed there? They declared, the idea of Christ. I've said that Christ is like a title, it's like an honour, like Lord, Master, Sir, moving from a disciple to an apostle, to a prophet, to an enlightened one. So once you are enlightened and the prophets are able to oh my goodness, now what was his name now, the Frenchman who was banned and prophesied the teachings, the quatrains of, who's written the quatrains now, I can't think, is you get to that Edgar Casey level, and you get to be able to foresee. So Christ-like consciousness, coming with Jesus as a Christ-like consciousness, elevated, reborn, able to see, able to feel, think, to know, and to instinctively act with good self-governance at all times, following common laws, universal common laws. When I speak of common law, I hope that, so the idea of Christ, Jesus was allegedly the character in the story's name and Christ was his title. It is quite, we got faith, we don't need Bibles, don't take the Archangel Michael, it's quite vital you hear this recital. You shall all hold the equitable title, we get high on the opposite of Nital. Boom selector. Now, in studying the pagan mystery cultices, there is always a dangerous temptation to cover them with the Christian Easter mystery. Let me illustrate this by a faithful description of the
Phrygian Easter.
Phrygian Easter festivals. In addition to the Phrygian festivals, I could also cite other festivals, for these were equally widespread. In a letter to the sons of Constantine, Firmicus gives the following account of the Phrygian Easter festival. The statue of god Attis was bound to the trunk of a fir tree and carried round in solemn procession at midnight. Is that the man that holds up the earth? I'm not sure. Then the sufferings of the god were reenacted. At the same time, a lamb was placed at the foot of the tree. At dawn, the resurrection of the god was proclaimed, whilst on the previous night when the god was bound to the tree and seemingly given over to death, the multitude broke out in wild lamentations, as was customary during the ritual. Now when the resurrection of the god was announced at sunrise, the lugubrious chants were suddenly transformed into wild outbursts of joy. The statue of god, Firmicus tells us, was buried elsewhere. During the night, when the melancholy dirges reached their climax, a light shone in the darkness, and the tomb was opened. The god had risen, and the priest addressed the assembled populace in these words: "Take comfort, ye faithful, for the god is saved, and ye too will be saved." There is no denying that these religious festivals, celebrated untold centuries before the mystery of Golgotha, show a great similarity to the Easter mystery of Christianity. Because this idea was so attractive, many believe that these ideas of the suffering, death and resurrection of the God were widespread and had been, to some extent, welded into a unity under Christian influence and transferred to Jesus of Nazareth. So Christianity before Christianity, I've shown you countless times, time and time again, how and why we treat the Bible with contempt. It is important to understand the real origin of these pagan pre-Christian rites. They date far back into the past and sprang from those profound and original insights into the nature of man and his relation to the cosmos as revealed through atavistic clairvoyance. Of course, at the time when the Phrygian festivals were celebrated, people did not understand their real meaning any more than the Freemasons of today understand the significance of rites that they practice. When I mentioned about travelling from the west to the east and to get enlightened, and sometimes I've spoken in certain circles and I've heard them tell me that they come back, they have returned from their travels, is a commonality within the Freemason society, and they go on their travels to get enlightened, to learn, to go on their quest to elevate themselves. Nonetheless, all these ceremonies date back to a time when ancient wisdom, a grandiose knowledge of the universe and man existed, a knowledge which is exceedingly difficult to understand for some today. Remember that not only is man dependent upon his environment in relation to his physical body, but that his spirit and soul are also an integral part of his environment, or its environment, his, I know, their environment. He draws on his environment for his ideas and representations. They become routine responses, second nature to man, and for various reasons man cannot escape them. Therefore, with the best will in the world, it is difficult to understand certain knowledge which, for reasons I have already mentioned, has been lost in the course of spiritual evolution of humanity. As it's not been lost, it's been censored, it's been coveted, and the chattel and the meek are not necessarily deemed worthy enough to know it. You shall live in sin. The natural science of today, there is no need to repeat my admiration for its achievements, though I harbour certain reservations about it. It's concerned only with the superficial aspects of things. It can make only a minimal contribution to an understanding of their true nature. It is that science has made great advances in certain spheres, but it all depends on what one understands by great advances. the intervention of wireless telegraphy and many other discoveries which are important contributions to our life today, are certainly deserving of admiration. But one may ask, where does that take us? If we were to pursue this question, we should come face to face with what is forbidden territory today. Modern science naturally considers the primordial wisdom, the last corrupt remnants of which survived in the mystery cultices I have mentioned, to be sheer folly. That may well be, but what is foolishness in the eyes of men may often be wisdom in the sight of God. I would argue that the establishments have coveted the information, and they rewarded the bringing back of the information to the monarchy, the establishment, the empires as such, and they rewarded them with their works of alchemy, works of religious nature, works on mysticism, spiritualism, and brought them into the club by giving them a knighthood and OBE, etc. titles to them, and moving them into communities such as privileged rights, elevation of rights. So the institutions there, the Commonwealth, England, monarchies, have coveted this information through others that have gone and got it and then decided not to outlay it in the academic teachings of said landmass, continent, country. True insight into the nature of the universe and man discloses, amongst other things, I propose today to emphasize those aspects which are important from an understanding of the mystery of Golgotha. A certain conception of the human organism which modern science regards as the heart of absurdity, i.e. that the human organism is fundamentally different from the animal organism. I have already mentioned many of these differences, but today I will confine myself to the difference which bears upon the mystery of Golgotha. When we make a serious study of the animal organism in the light of spiritual science, we find that it bears within the seeds of death. In other words, spiritual investigation, when applied to the animal organism, recognizes that, by virtue of its constitution, this organism must inevitably suffer death, that it disintegrates and finally returns to the mineral kingdom. The death of an animal is not something mysterious and inexplicable. When we study its organism, we realize that for the animal, death is as natural to it, i.e. the organism, as the need for food and drink. That death is a necessity for the animal lies in the nature of its organism. This is not the case with man, for his organism is differently constituted. Here we touch upon a sphere that must remain a total enigma to modern science. When we study the human organism in the light of spiritual science, we find nothing in the human organism itself which suggests that death is inevitable. We must accept death in man as something they experience and which cannot be explained. For, originally, neither man nor his physical organism were made for death. The fact that death occurs in man from within cannot be explained from the beginning of man itself. The inner being as such provides no explanation of death. 1 minute there, I just got a little message. I realise that this view will be regarded as folly by the scientific pundits of today. Generally speaking, it is extremely difficult to arrive at an understanding of these problems, for they touch upon profound mysteries, and even today, if we wish to understand these problems, we can only treat of them after the fashion of Saint Martin in his book. There's a nice bit of French there, 1 minute.
Des erreurs et de la vérité.
Des erreurs et de la vérité, in an important passage when speaking of the evolutionary consequences that follow from a supernatural event that took place in the spiritual world before man first incarnated on the physical plane. He wrote the following words, which will be readily understood by everyone who is familiar with such matters. And the words he wrote were, "However much I may desire to enlighten you, the obligations I have undertaken do not permit me to commit in any way upon this subject. And furthermore, I, for my part, would rather blush for man's transgressions than speak of them. Now we've mentioned transgressions and what transgressions are and how one would be considered to transgress. Joinder persons, artificial person, taking the Father's name in vain. Transgressions is a broad subject there. For Saint Martin is here alluding to a transgression committed by man before his first incarnation on earth. He was forbidden to speak of this openly, as I said, about the supposition and the aberration of information and following the mainstream academic narrative. St. Martin was forbidden to speak of this subject matter openly, but today we are in a position to speak of many things that St. Martin could not discuss in his time. Not because humanity has progressed since that time, but for other reasons. But if we were to discuss a truth such as man is not intended to die, together with all the relevant factors, we would have to touch upon matters which may not be disclosed today. Man is not born to die, and yet he dies. These words express something which is obviously an absurdity to the pundits of modern science, but which to those who seek to penetrate to a true understanding of the world must be reckoned amongst the most profound mysteries. This realization that man was not born to die and yet dies lies concealed in those ancient mysteries, including the Attis mysteries, which I have already mentioned. Man looked to the mysteries for an answer to this enigma, that man was not born to die and yet dies. Now, why were the mysteries celebrated? They were celebrated in order that man should be reminded afresh each year of something he wished to hear, something he wished to experience and realize within his very soul. He wished to be reassured that the time had not yet come when he would have to face the inexplicable problem of his death. What did the neophyte hope for from the Attis mysteries? He had the instinctive feeling that a time would one day come when humanity would seriously have to face the reality of death, which remained an enigma. But this time had not yet come. And whilst the priests celebrated the death and resurrection of the God, man felt reassured and consoled, for the time had not yet come when he would have to come to terms with the reality of his death. It was common knowledge in ancient times that the event described in the first chapter of Genesis, and which understood symbolically today, referred to a reality. The people of ancient times knew this instinctively. It was modern materialism that first outgrew the instinctive feeling that the temptation of Lucifer referred to an actual occurrence. On this question, Darwin's materialist interpretation, which is intellectually so perverse, is very far removed from the truth. This crude, perverted thinking believes that by a gradual and continual process over long periods of time, man has developed from animal ancestry. In such a materialist hypothesis, theory of the story of temptation can have no place. For only a lowbrow could believe that an archetypal ape or monkey could have been tempted by Lucifer. Yes, Darwin's theory of evolution on the adaptation of whatever the correct title is just a theory. Instinctively, people knew at the time of the mysteries that the story of creation concealed as des erreurs et de la vérité that had once been common knowledge. They felt that man as originally created was not mortal, and because of this fact they felt that something had entered into his physical organism and had corrupted it, and so opened the doors to mortality. Man became mortal through a moral defect, through what is called original sin. I will return to this later. Man became mortal not after the fashion of other forms of organic life, not as the inevitable consequence of natural law, but through a moral defect. The soul was the seat of his mortality. The animal soul, as species soul, is immortal. It incarnates in the individual animal, which is mortal in virtue of its organism. The species soul or group soul relinquishes the animal organism, which is subject to death without having undergone any transformation. From the outset, the nature of the animal organism is such that, as individual organism, it is ordained to die. This does not apply to the human organism to the same extent. In the case of the human organism, the species soul or group soul, which lies at the root of this organism, is able to manifest in the individual man, and as independent human organism ensures him immortality. Man could only become mortal through a moral act originating in the soul. In a certain sense, man had to be endowed with a soul before he could become mortal. The moment one treats these ideas as abstractions, they become meaningless. We must endeavour to attain a concrete knowledge of spiritual realities. In ancient times, and also in the period shortly before the mystery of Golgotha, people never doubted for a moment that the soul brought death to man. The soul has evolved through the ages. In the course of this evolution, the soul has progressively corrupted the organism and in consequence has worked destructively upon the organism. Man looked back to ancient times and said to himself, a moral event took place in olden times and its effect upon the soul is such that whenever the soul now incarnates, it corrupts the body. And because it corrupts the body, man can no longer live between birth and death in a state of innocence. In the course of hundreds of thousands of years, the condition of the soul has grown progressively worse, and the body has suffered continuous corruption. Thus, it is increasingly difficult for man to find his way back to the spirit. The further evolution advances, the more the body is corrupted by the soul, and the more the seeds of death are sown into the body. And the time must come when it will be no longer possible for man, once he has lived his allotted span, to find his way back to the spiritual world. That's an interesting paragraph in itself, but we talk about the age of innocence there. Between man can no longer live between birth and death in a state of innocence. Well, segue. When one is born and the certificate of live birth is issued and all is well, and between the point of later registration with the General Registry Office, the officer for the registry of the general, you are to be in what is known as the age of innocence. Then once registration has taken place, you are civilly inactive, and you go from 0 up until, I believe, 18, 21 in some countries, but 18, 21, till you reach the age of majority and become legally responsible, legally liable, an adult in the eyes of the law, and civilly active. So that's an important segue, as it does touch upon the state of innocence. All right, we look at the age of innocence. In ancient times, it was this moment that was anticipated with fear and dread. People felt that after countless generations, a generation would arise whose souls would be so corrupt, the body and so the poisonous seeds of death, that man could no longer reclaim his spiritual heritage. And this generation will one day appear, they said. Let's think about times of today, where we are, how we view things, what's going on. And they wanted to be reassured whether this fatal moment was drawing near, and to this end the Attis rites and similar ceremonies were enacted. At the same time, they sought to discover whether the souls of men still had so much of divine plenitude that the time had not yet come when these souls had abandoned their divine heritage and could no longer find their way back to the spirit. Divine heritage, when we talk about rights, unalienable rights, inherent authority, on a fundamental, we talk there divine heritage. Great importance therefore was attached to the words of the priest when he said, "Take comfort, ye faithful, the God is saved, your salvation is assured." With these words the priest wished to indicate that God was still active in the world, that the souls of men had not yet severed all connection with the divine. The priest sought to comfort the people, saying, "The resurrection of the God is ever renewed, the God is still within you. Have I not said that ye are all gods?" Psalms, 82nd Psalm, I do believe. Some verses from John. I and the Father are one. When we touch upon these questions, we become aware of the deep, unplumbed depth of feelings and emotions which were once characteristic of a particular epoch in the evolution of man. Today, man has not the slightest inkling of the inner conflicts with which these people of earlier times had to wrestle. Ignorance is bliss. Though they may have been totally illiterate and have known nothing of what we call culture today, according to academia, not my thoughts and Rudolph's thoughts, yet they could not escape these feelings. And in the mystery schools which preserved the old traditions derived from ancient clairvoyant insight, the neophytes were told that if evolution were to continue unchanged, if the effects of original sin were to be prolonged, then a time would come when the souls of men would turn from God to a world of materialism, of their own creation, and would progressively corrupt the physical body and rapidly hasten the process of death. Now, I'll let that just linger in your thoughts for a moment there. The creation of death. Does that not sound like a time that we are in today? Modern times. 1 minute, I need to adjust the microphone. It seems to be moving its way down. These souls would remain earthbound and be relegated to the limbo. They would be lost. But since these schools still preserved the knowledge of the spirit, the knowledge of the trichotomy of man still survived. What I am speaking of at the moment, the seminaries, applied to the soul and not to the spirit, for the spirit is eternal and follows its own laws. From their spiritual insight, people knew that the soul would be relegated to the limbo, but the spirit would reappear in ever-repeated earth lives. A time in the evolution of the world was approaching when the spirits of men would incarnate anew and would look back upon the lost paradise which had once existed on earth. Souls would be lost, never to return. Spirits would reincarnate in bodies which they would activate after the fashion of automata, and the way in which this was done would be neither felt nor experienced by the soul. So when I talk about Satan's carnival, materialistic existence. But what, on the other hand, were the feelings of those who were drawn into the Christian Easter mystery? They felt that unless the earth received a new impulse, then in future incarnations, man would be born without a soul. They awaited something that earth evolution could not achieve of itself, something that was destined to enter earthly life from without, namely the mystery of Golgotha. They awaited the incarnation of a being who would save the souls of men from death. There was no need to save the spirit from death, but it was imperative to save the soul. This being, who entered the earth evolution from without by incarnation in the body of Jesus of Nazareth, was recognized as the Christ, who had come to save the souls of men. People were now able to unite spiritually with the Christ, so that through this union the soul loses its power to corrupt the body, and all that they had lost since the fall could gradually be recovered. That is why the mystery of Golgotha must be regarded as a central point in human evolution. And to some, the mystery of Golgotha is, in today's times of 2022, a brand new and unheard of conceptualization. From the fall until the mystery of Golgotha, man experienced a progressive decline of his spiritual forces. The forces of corruption had increasingly invaded his soul and threatened to make man an automation of the spirit, Deus ex machina. And from the mystery of Golgotha until the end of the earth cycle, all that was lost before the mystery of Golgotha will gradually be retrieved once more. Thus, at the conclusion of earth evolution, the spirits of human beings will incarnate into the physical body for the last time. These bodies will once again be immortal. It was in expectation of this redemption that men understood the mystery of Easter. So we've got here very complex work and lectures from Rudolf Steiner, Dr. Rudolf Steiner, We also have to remember the astro-theological references within the Bible, and planets, conjunctions, alignments, cyclical times that reoccur. The clock above. The animal kingdom could be seen as the animals in the stars, astronomy, etc., astrology. Before this could be realised, it was necessary to overcome the power which had caused the moral corruption of the soul, and this power was overcome by the decisive event on Golgotha. How did the early Christians who still possessed occult knowledge understand the last words of Christ on the cross? So we got physical and metaphysical annotations in this as well. They were living in the expectation of an external event that would bring to an end this corrupting influence of the soul. The cry of Christ on the cross, "It is finished," was a sign to them that the time had now come when the corrupting power of the soul was a thing of the past. It was a miraculous event fraught with vast and unsuspected mysteries, for tremendous questions are involved when we think about the mystery of Golgotha. When we pursue our studies further, we shall find that it is impossible to think of the mystery of Golgotha without also thinking of the risen Christ, the risen Christ. That is essential. In one of his most profound utterances, Paul says, "If Christ not be risen, then all our faith is in vain." The risen Christ is unique to Christianity and is inseparable from Christianity. The death of Christ is also an integral part of Christianity. But how is this death portrayed, and how must it be portrayed? Now I need to draw your attention to the T, I believe is the last letter in the Hebrew alphabet, and also represents the end. Christ dies on a cross, could be looked at as a T, a cross, an X is just a plus shape on its side. X marks the spot, existential existence. X is 10. X is what was used previously for one to use in place of a signature if one was illiterate and did not understand. Perhaps it was not Christianity that died upon the cross, initiates and scribes. It seems to me that it was justice that was perhaps crucified and died. An innocent man was put to death. This is why I say that. In the story where Jesus, the character of Jesus, as we see, he suffered and died. Those who crucified him clearly bear a heavy burden of guilt, for he who died was innocent. And we're going around in courts and with ministers and generals and secretaries asking for justice, just ice, and we're trying to look at law, but yet in this story an innocent man was put to death by the ruling empire. Often those that receive judicial punishment are innocent. By that I mean they have not harmed another soul or man. They have some fiscal, civil issues and controversies that render them as an artificial person to be publicly liable for the charges, the monies, the credits, the promises, to transfer, offset, setting off, So what was the significance of this guilt for humanity? It brought them salvation, for Christ had not died upon the cross. For had Christ not died upon the cross, humanity could not have been saved. In the crucifixion we are confronted by a unique event. The death of Christ on the cross was the greatest boon bestowed upon mankind. John XI, I believe 11:49 to 52. And the heaviest guilt that mankind has taken upon itself is this, that Christ was crucified. Thus the heaviest guilt coincides with the greatest good fortune. And as I've mentioned, Christ to me is a title. I come with Jesus as Christ, or Christ consciousness, as I know whom I am, an authentic man endowed with a consciousness, soul and spirit, an enlightened initiate of self and universal cosmic law. Jesus was the character's name within the Bible. Christ Jesus was also a title and name used within the Bible to describe Jesus, or Zeus backward Suez. Da Vinci's paintings contain allegedly codes, the planets. We see, these are my notes at the end of this, drawing to the end of this first section of page 11 of 39. We're a quarter of the way through. We see Da Vinci's paintings containing codes. We see them perhaps containing planets. When we look at planets, we've got Jupiter, Jew, Peter the Jew. We've got Saturn, Satan, Saturn, the eater of its children in the Garden of Eden, and we've got Jesus, who was the Son, S-O-N, or even the S-U-N. The superficial mind no doubt will pay little attention to this, but for those who probe deeper, these statements and questions are fraught with profound mysteries. The most heinous crime in the history of the world proved to be the salvation of mankind. Now we must understand this enigma, or at least try to understand it, if we are to comprehend the mystery of Golgotha, and the key to the solution of this enigma is found in the exemplary words spoken by Christ on the cross. Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do. And then that brings to my mind, ignorance of the law is no excuse. The right understanding of these words provides the answer to the cardinal question: why did the most heinous crime become the source of the salvation of mankind? If you are to reflect upon this, you will realize that one must take into account the trichotomy of man in order to understand the mystery of Golgotha, the mind, body, spirit. For Christ died in order to redeem the souls of men. He reclaims the souls of men that would have been lost but for his advent. Morality would have vanished from the earth, and the spirit inhabiting a body that reacted mechanically would have been the victim of necessity, in which morality has no place. Mankind would have been unable to have psychic experiences. The mission of Christ was to bring humanity back to God. It is not surprising, therefore, that 3 centuries before Christ, Aristotle, a most enlightened Greek, failed to understand the nature of the soul and its relation to the spirit at a time when the crisis of man's soul was at hand. There were many discrepancies in Aristotle's view of the soul, since he could not have known of the coming of the Saviour, and it is not surprising, therefore, that his views of the soul were illogical. How is one to account for the fact that the erroneous conceptions of Aristotle concerning the relationship of soul and spirit persisted so long? The significance of Christ for the soul of men is that he demonstrates once again that man is a threefold being of body, soul and spirit, and that an inner relationship exists between objective events and moral events, physical, metaphysical. We shall never fully understand this relationship until we accept the idea of the trichotomy of man. If we wish, 1 minute, let me just check things. Yeah, it's working well. If we wish to arrive in some measure at an understanding of the mystery of Golgotha, we must penetrate to the innermost recesses of the human soul. In the present lecture, I have only been able to offer an introduction to this theme. I believe that it is our immediate concern to speak of these things at the present time. That was 1930 something. Now we're looking still at the same objective moral compass in 2022. We must take advantage of this Easter festival to inquire more closely into these matters insofar as it is possible today. Perhaps it may be possible thereby to awaken in us much that may one day be a seed that will only mature in future time, for it is only gradually that we can come to realize that we are living in an age where there are many things we cannot fully comprehend. This is evidence from the difficulty people experience today in developing a clear and conscious understanding of events that are imminent. Unfortunately, it is not possible to indicate even briefly how one should understand in clear consciousness the painful event of which the people of Europe, or at least of Central Europe, that would have been the Eastern Bloc at the time, have only recently been informed. Today we are only half aware of these things. And then I've got a passage which I'm not going to recite because it's huge and it will take up a good 5 to 10 pages. The Gospel of John 5, 6, 7, the mystery of Golgotha. And this is Rudolph's interpretation of the Gospel of John, chapter 7, and on the mystery of Golgotha. So I will read some little bits, the first paragraph, and then I will skip that, and you will get that in the publication when it has been released alongside the recent publications that I've done so far, in conjunction, parallel with the equity and trust 3 certainties that I'm doing simultaneously, and whilst managing a 50-hour week warehouse position, 12 hours a day, 4 days on, 4 days off, whilst managing private affairs and the private domain, Facebook, Telegram. There's a lot going off, and time is short. My time is finite, and it's in high demand privately and publicly, and it's getting tiring. So I would like to give you a teaser in this instance. I believe we've been on an hour or so, and then I would like to utilize my time effectively and point you to this publication, and it will have the same title as what is on the YouTube video here today, and you will find that in our various domains, telegrams.com. Okay, let me just see, does it tell me how long? I haven't a Scooby-Doo, an hour or so. The Gospel of John, chapter 7, the mystery of Golgotha, interpreted, analysed by Rudolph. The whole of the Gospel of St. John culminates in that event in human history which we call the mystery of Golgotha. To comprehend this mystery of Golgotha esoterically predicates also the ability to decipher the deep significance of this gospel. If we turn our attention to what exists at the very central point of this mystery and wish to express it in secret or occult terms, we must contemplate the moment of the crucifixion when the blood flowed from the wounds of the Saviour, and at the same time we must remember something which has often been said in the course of these lectures, that for one who knows the spiritual worlds, all material, substantial, physical objectivity is only the outer expression, the external manifestation of something spiritual. Now let us permit the physical event to arise before our souls. Christ Jesus upon the cross, the blood flowing from his wounds, what does this picture, the content of which is a physical event, express for those who are able to understand the Gospel of St. John? This physical event, the occurrences of Golgotha, is the expression, the manifestation of a spiritual event which stands at the central point of all earthly happenings. Anyone interpreting these words according to the present materialistic world concept will not be able to make much out of them, for they will not be able to imagine that at that time something occurred in this unique event of Golgotha which differs from some other like event, or from one perhaps physically similar. There is very great difference between all the earthly occurrences which preceded this event of Golgotha and those that succeeded. So let me just skim through page 13 of 39 and see where I end up by skipping this. And then I'm skipping the Gospel of John for 8, human evolution in its relation to the Christ principle, page 20 of 39. We have seen that we come closer to the profound meaning of the Gospel of St. John when we seek to approach it from various sides, and yesterday we were able from a certain point of view to indicate one of the most significant mysteries of this Gospel. By yesterday I mean the previous lecture of the Gospel of John, 7 was it, yeah, and then we're going on to 8 by Rudolf Steiner. In order that we may gradually reach a complete understanding of the mystery presented yesterday, or the previous lecture, it will now be necessary to consider the advent of Christ Jesus in our post-Atlantean period. We have gathered together the most varied material in order that we might trace the evolution of the human being and within it the Christ principle. So he brings in Atlantis there. Our forebearers dwelt upon old Atlantis. In the lecture of the day before yesterday, we were able to call attention especially to the external bodily appearance of these our Atlantean forefathers. We said that not until the last part of the Atlantean period men did bear some resemblance to their present form. Even towards the last third of the Atlantean period, they were still essentially very different creatures from the men of today. Although to the external senses they appeared much the same, we can best make clear what progress human being has made if we compare him in his present state with any of the existing higher animals. You must not imagine that only what is physical exists in the physical world, or it would be a great mistake if you were to seek all that is etheric, or in fact all that is astral, only in the supersensible world. So quoting Nikola Tesla and 0-point energy, atomic, subatomic, quantum entanglement in these flux fields of modality. All right, and the light, the fraction, the spectrum of light, and what we actually see is probably 7% of actual reality. The light spectrum that our eyes see in, and the information is given from our eyes receiving light refractions into the brain, culminates to about 7% of reality. So we see less than 90%. We see less than 10% of reality, leaving 93% unseen. Don't bite your nails on telebox, David. Doing some wallpaper stripping and painting in Yanka's room, and I've got some coarse cuticles. Manicure for the governor, please. Oh, it's annoying me. I'm skipping through this Gospel 8 of John by Steiner. See where that leads me to. With regard to Easter and the rebirth story, and to close down page 30 of 39, we have thus. For those that didn't hear the first video, Highway to Heaven, with Kevin, myself and Claire, Bible shock. How ancient stone claims leader before Jesus rose from the dead in 3 days. The Gabriel stone, or the Gabriel inscription. An ancient stone dating back to before the birth of Christ claims another leader rose from the dead after 3 days, just like the story told in the Bible, according to interpretations. The central figure to Christianity is believed to be the incarnation of God and the awaited Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament of the Bible. According to the Church, Jesus was born in 4 AD and was crucified under the order of Pontius Pilate, the Roman prefect, sometime between 30 AD and 33 AD, before rising again through the resurrection 3 days later. But a discovery made in 2000 may suggest there was inspiration behind this Bible story. The Gabriel stone found near the Dead Sea, and we've got the Dead Sea Scrolls to put in with there as well for those that are aware. The Gabriel inscriptions found near the Dead Sea was a tablet with 87 lines of Hebrew text, and contains several prophecies written in first person, including an apparent resurrection. It dates back as far as the 1st century BC, and biblical investigator Simcha let me just get this right. Plays havoc with my dyslexia, this one.
Jacobavicii travelled to its origin to find out more.
Jacobavicii travelled to its origin to find out more during the series that this is what it was brought to me on Decoding the Ancients. The narrator said in 2004, Simcha has now unravelled many of the stone's secrets, like the writing style, the archaeology, and the way the stone appeared on the antiquities market, all point Perea as its place of origin. Simcha has also discovered that a rebel named Shimeon, or Simon, came from this area, and that his followers thought he was a messiah. Israel Knoll believes that he has found strong textual evidence suggesting that Shimeon's followers were the first to claim their leader rose from the dead. The argument centres on a word mentioned on the stone that it is meaningless to anyone except a biblical scholar. The word is domin, which means dung, but Knoll points out that biblical references to domin means rotting flesh. Simon of Perea was a former slave of Herod the Great who rebelled and was killed by the Romans between 4 BC and 14 AD. During the times and life of Jesus of Nazareth in the story contained within the Bible. Biblical scholar Israel believes that he is the man prophesied on the Gabriel stone. The narrator added, around the time of Jesus, the story on the stone seems to fit Shimeon and no one else. At first Shimeon was successful. He defeated a Roman garrison and crowned himself Messiah, but the Romans went after him with vengeance and chased him into a Perean gully. After a bloody battle, they decapitated him, and to further demoralise his followers, they didn't allow him to be buried. This is the story Knoll believes he has decoded. Dr. Knoll and Shimeon headed to where they believe Simon of Perea died. Mr. Jacobovici said, "This makes sense. I can see a battle happening right here. A few people could hold off a lot of people, but they would get surrounded." That was in the gully in Perea where they believe this incident happened with Simon. The leader wants to get a better position and runs up to a place like this, but is chased. Eventually they decapitate him. He falls and dies. And this is very easy to guard this place, and the dead body would turn to domin. Mr. Knoll translated line 80 of the inscription as, "In 3 days live, I Gabriel command you." An instruction to Simon of Perea to resurrect in 3 days, just as Jesus supposedly did. The reference to Gabriel is of obvious interest to biblical scholars, as he is the angel mentioned in both the Hebrew Bible and the Christian Bible. If you do not know what the Hebrew Bible is and the first 5 books of Moses, then you would need to know, aka the Torah. Mr. Knoll believed this story influenced Jesus. He said, actually, out of the gravest crisis, the new idea comes, the idea that the death of the Messiah was an essential part of the process of salvation. So the next generation, the idea was picked up by Jesus for his messianic activity, or maybe not by Jesus, by one of Jesus's relatives, and perhaps some influence by John the Baptist, and just speculating. But however, other scholars reconstructed the faint writing on the stone as different words entirely, rejecting Mr. Knoll's reading. So academia may have got other, the church in itself may have got other wishes for the interpretation of this stone. In 2011, Mr. Knoll accepted that sign is a more probable reading than live, although he maintains that live is a possible reading. However, the meaning of the phrase in the currently accepted reading is still unclear. Mr. Knoll still maintains the historical background of the inscription to be as mentioned above. He now views Shimeon's death, according to the inscription, as an essential part of the redemptive process. So this article discusses Gabriel's revelation, and it was found and published on Dr. James' site that discusses and reports on all things biblical from the Hebrew Bible to early Christianity in the Roman world and beyond. The stone itself is currently on display in Jerusalem at the Israel Museum. An ancient limestone tablet covered with mysterious Hebrew text that features the Archangel Gabriel is at the centre of an exhibition in Jerusalem, even as scholars continue to argue about what it means. The so-called Gabriel stone, a metre 3-foot tall tablet said to have been found 13 years ago, well, a bit more now, 2020, on the banks of the Dead Sea, features 87 lines of an unknown prophetic text dated as early as the 1st century BC, at the time of the Second Jewish Temple. Scholars see it as a portal into the religious ideas circulating in the Holy Land in the era when Jesus was born. Its form is also unique. It is ink written on stone, not carved, and no other such religious text has been found in the region. Curators at the Israel Museum, where the first exhibit dedicated to the stone has opened, say it is the most important document found in the area since the discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls. What is not so well known is that Professor Knoll has changed his mind about the translation, and thus the translation of the key line 80 in the text that he had previously argued talked about resurrection of the dead after 3 days. By 3 days live, I Gabriel command you, Prince of Princes, the dung of rocky crevices. In a paper given at a 2009 conference at Rice University on the Gabriel Stone, now published in the conference volume as The Apocalyptic Dimensions of the Gabriel Revolution in Their Historical Context, Knoll says he was mistaken in his original reading. Knoll still maintains that the text was composed shortly after 4 BCE by followers of the messianic leader Simon, who was killed in Transjordan in 4 BCE, which is where the stone was probably found. He continues to see it as an example of what he calls catastrophic messianism, where a slain Messiah gives a new holy covenant to Israel. What he now doubts is that the text speaks of making the dead live after 3 days. Following the readings of Yardeni and Eliza, he accepts the translation for line 80, in 3 days the sign will be given, I am Gabriel. The critical words that Knoll once read as a verb, to make live, now is read as the noun sign. On the whole, however, his overall interpretation is the same, and if he is correct, the text continues to have great significance for our understanding of messianism among the late Second Temple Jewish groups. Knoll's integrity in so freely changing his mind, I am not convinced that this alternative reading is necessarily correct. Unfortunately, the text is faded at this point, and even after subjecting it to a battery of scientific tests designed to enhance its clarity, it may well be that we will never know the certainty of how it should be read. The stone, if authentic, is most important in the argument between Judaism and Christianity as to whether or not a Redeemer was expected within Judaism at that time. If authentic, most modern Judaism's arguments against the necessity for a suffering Messiah fall down, as well as the argument that the Messianic Judaism or Christianity were not offshoots of Judaism at the time of Yeshua of Nazareth. The stone, if authentic, could really be pivotal in determining which group had had the proper interpretation of the prophecy in Scripture for the last 2,000 years. Christianity is a very young religion of which its own leader and his followers deem to act as perfect but remain to be imperfect. God, Allah, Creator, or whichever way you call him, he is one, and it's only this different religions that creates conflicts amongst humanitarian. There is no better religion than any other. There is salvation in all different religions. There is no heaven or hell. Life after death is imminent for every living organism. It's a cycle of reincarnation until eternity. We have lived as dinosaurs before, and we will continue to live as machine robots tomorrow. God is for us all, and people, please stop criticising each other on which religion is better. The common factor remains that we all worship the same created. In Luke 24:13-35, Yeshua explains himself to them. Though all the scriptures, we need to know that Yeshua was representing Yahweh incarnated in the flesh when he walked in the Tanakh, and when he was represented prophetically through man. When references are made about son of David, son of Joseph, Ephraim, etc., or to Messiah, scriptures, it's all foreknowledge, shadow of the true Messiah to come. In the book of Gabriel's revelation on the discussion point of to rise from the dead within 3 days, I don't think it's referring to Yeshua in this context, but to the 2 witnesses. Tanakh, Jonah was in the belly of the fish for 3 days. Or Tanakh, New Testament, Yeshua, Jesus Christ himself rose on the 3rd day. End times, the 2 witnesses, and after 3 days, half the spirit of life form God entered into them, and they stood up upon their feet. Both in the book of Zechariah and Revelations 11:11 talks about the Armageddon war before the appearance of the Saviour. Other scriptures related to the Gabriel's revelation: Zechariah 11:8, 3 shepherds also I cut off in 1 month. Zechariah 13:4, on that day every prophet will be ashamed of their prophetic vision. They will not put on a prophet's garments of hair in order to deceive. A prophet's garments of hair, courts, wigs, wolf in sheep's clothing. Each will say, I am not a prophet, I am a farmer, the land has been my livelihood since my youth. And for the Christian scribes that ask me about my position of coming with Jesus as Christ-like consciousness, to reiterate, my arguments for the above that have been encoded in this particular edition of the Holy Testament of the New World. SPLSPro.com, Christian Disclosure has arrived. We go to the King James Version of... Wait, no, I've lost my place.
Philippians 2.
We got Philippians 2, 5:11. 5. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. 6. Who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God. 7. But made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. 8. And being found in fashion as man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. 9. Wherefore God also hath highly exalted him, and given him a name which is above every name. 10. That at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, of things in heaven, and things in earth, and things under the earth. 11. And that every tongue should confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to glory of the God the Father. So I trust that helps you make the connections amongst other, information and outlays and publications that I, David, this channel, Indiglo, and SPLSPro.com, the many levels of interpretations of the stories contained within the good book. Then I look at Of Gods and Kings, let us sing to the vicar rooted in the kirk, church. Vicar, Latin, vicarious, from vices, a turn or its root. 1. In a general sense, a person deputed or authorised to perform the functions of another, a substitute in office. The Pope pretends to be the vicar of Jesus Christ on earth. He had pretended the earthly representation of Christ Jesus. He has under him a grand vicar who is a cardinal, and whose jurisdiction extends over all priests, regular and secular. In the canon law, the priest of a parish, the predial tithes of which are impropriated or appropriated, that is, belong to a chapter or religious house, or to a layman who receives them, and only allows the vicar the smaller tithes or a salary. Apostolical vicars are those who perform the functions of the Pope in churches or provinces committed to their direction, the Holy Sees and the Dioceses. Authorised, participle passive, warranted by right, supported by authority, derived from legal or proper authority, having power or authority. So note, by having the title of Authorised Version, the 1611 King James Bible is literally the legal authority of the legal law of men and mammon. So that which the present 2022 New World legal order has been constructed from. And initiates of Indiglo and SPLS Pro, do not read the King James Bible because it is a good translation or more easily understandable. Rather because it is the book that the London City Templars' current legal legislative law and private society is based upon. When I say law, I mean legal law. See the 10 commercial maxims of law and the associated biblical precepts. Other biblical translations are irrelevant for legal purposes. One must not look for an easy-to-read translation, for that will be a work of mere fiction, and we here at Indiglo, SPLS Pro, have noted the pretext, the text, the subtext, the narrative, and various interpretations, physical, metaphysical, within the 1611 King James Bible, to allow us to be able to find lawful, Loreful, and lawful, LAWFUL, remedy, to invoke Christ as remedy. One must learn the language of the authorized version so as to understand what authority is, which is the legal language of the earthly representative known or previously known as the Vicar of Christ, the earthly representative. Remember that this translation is of the king, God in brackets, of the government, God in brackets, and is the evidence, testament in brackets, of law that all right and authority is claimed by the vicar, the papal crown. I brought to you the creation of the 3 crowns, the first testamentary proclamation by Pope Boniface in 1302, and the subsequent creations of the 3 crowns, Eterni Regis, Convocation, and etc. When I say to you that the London City Templars law system is based on the Bible, that by having the title of authorized version, the 1611 King James Bible is literally the legal authority of the legal law of men, aka Mammon. Okay, so I can't put it any more simpler than that for those that have been lost or are confused about my status, standing and position, about Jesus and coming with Jesus as Christ and Christ-like consciousness. I hope this video, to close down on the 25th of April, after, this is part 2, you know, after the video Highway to Heaven, helps you understand the perplexity of this transcendental nonsense that we find ourselves, you know, coexisting with. In God we trust. Okay, so the number 3, very important, relevant. The number 12, the papal crowns, Mammon, church, Latin is important as well, ecclesiastical, speak, interpretations, all have their own dictionaries, constitution, meanings, definitions and interpretation. So Oxford English Dictionary aside and Anglo-Babel, legalese, Black's Law Dictionary aside, ecclesiastical, Latin, church, dictionary, implied meanings and definitions aside. You know, you see now how this is all hopefully coming together with our Christian disclosure. As we can read, the word Satan refers to the Hebrew word for the adversary of man. Like the word demon, there is no supernatural, you know, superstition here. The Bible allegories use fire and brimstone to describe men of unfettered evil genius that are adversarial to nature and life, and therefore must place other men in bondage and surety to them through the concepts of the government and religion. So we look at the birth certificate, the artificial person, persons, and legal titles, rights, age of innocence, civilly inactive, becoming active, becoming a major at the age of majority, legally liable, and dates of birth, names, fathers' names, surnames, national insurance number, social insurance numbers, social security numbers are not us, they are our artificial person, our doing business as, our citizenship in amongst these seas to set sail. Our person is our agent. Monsanto, Raytheon, Bank of America, the Vatican, the City of London, Washington DC, these are the personifications of men in rebellion against God, aka nature, idols of false gods, mere men, Satan incarnate, Satan's carnival before ye, feeding on the low-hanging fruits. So far, the synagogue of Satan has suppressed not only the Bible's teachings, but also the path to abandon all of mankind from government. It has created in men a false status, misleadingly called Christianity, that under the church doctrine fellow governments as the law of the land, while abusing and usurping God's creation, nature. In truth, every action of today's modern Christian is against the teachings of the Bible and its Christ character. I need to just take a moment there. We shall not be judged by false Christians. False statuses, status, standing, capacity, from public legal person to private lawful man. Does man have the capacity to be legally? No. Recognised? No, they don't. No, he doesn't. Persons do. Legal persons, juridical persons, true persons, natural persons. Okay, so we look at usurping every action. Doctrines, the doctrine in itself, the church doctrine, follow government as the law of the land, abusing and usurping God's creation, nature, man, our energy. It's only ever about our energy, our time, how much sweat equity we can put in to serve these private corporations, these private banking cartels, to service the debts, the alleged debts that exist in bankruptcy as we know it within the United Kingdom, the United States Incorporated, and the institutions that have taken over with this mandrake money system. Where there is no free agency, there can be no morality. Where there is no temptation, there can be little claim to virtue. Where the routine is rigorously proscribed by law, the law and not the man must have the credit of the conduct. William H. Prescott, History of the Conquest of Peru, 1847. The word I mentioned a few times in this presentation is proscribed. Proscribed, not prescribed. Now I want to go into equity, clean hands, as we look at Pontius Pilate there. I find no fault with Jesus, and I wash my hands of him. He who comes into equity must come with clean hands. Explained by splspro.com and our Christian Disclosure. So again, when I talk about the interpretations, meanings and definitions and the analogies within the New World Testament, common law is ruled and governed by equity. Equity is the soul and the spirit of the law. I have a quote here for you to back up what I'm saying. I've given you above my NOI, my notice of intent, that the common law is ruled and governed by equity, and that equity is the soul and spirit of the law. And so now I, David, give you my statement of interest, my SOI, to back up and clarify my claim that equity is higher than common law. Now, equity forms common law. It contains private remedy. So within the common law and the merger of the civil procedure rules, equity was fused with the common law. It forms part of the common law, but it is not the common law as we know it, but it formulates part of the common law that the legal London Templars Law Society legal law is based upon. Okay, so I feel a sneeze come in. Egi Shigedra, as they say in Hungarian. Bless me. Why do we say bless you when you sneeze? That's quite a thought to have at this moment in time. Why is a sneeze formed? I think I may have another one accumulating up the sinuses there. And why do we say bless you when that happens? I don't know the answer to that. Here is one proof that, and the following quote is from the American or Institutes of American Law, 1882, by John of the Bouviers. Soul and spirit of the law, equity. Law is nothing without equity, and equity is everything, even without law. Those who perceive what is just and what is unjust only through the eyes of the law never see it as well as those who behold it with the eyes of equity. Law may be looked upon in some manner as an assistance for those who have a weak or perception of right and wrong, in the same way that optical glasses are useful for those who are short-sighted, long-sighted, etc., or those whose visual organs are deficient. Equity in its true and genuine meaning is the soul and the spirit of the law. Positive law is construed and rational law is made by it. Institutes of American Law, 1882, Volume 2, Section 3724, Paragraph 4 by John Bouvier. Equity is not law. Equity is the soul and spirit of the law. The rights and the spirit of equity are identified as and embody the very energies of righteousness. Equity supersedes common law as well as statute law, but you will have a runaround trying to establish a court of equity in modern times. It can be done. There are courts of equity, but you really need to know what you're doing and be able to stand upon it for it to be recognised and enforceable under English law. In equity, the judge would make a ruling or decision based on the principalities of what the fair and just decision would be. Invoking equity in the courts would simply be to bring justice, to bring grace and mercy. The law cannot be fulfilled without equity, because equity is love, and love is all. Do you want to follow the written word of the law in the commercial world of the dead? Because our person, our artificial person, our doing business as our agent is a soulless, dead entity, legal entity, okay? Or do you want to walk in peace, love and equity as a living light on the land? If the answer to that is you want to walk in peace, love and equity as a living light on the land, then I invite you to come and join us at splspro.com. and read our landing page, have a look about our private lawful community, and please pledge 12 promises and credits, UK English monies, or about $17 worldwide, America, and so many euros, 15, 60, I'm not sure about the conversion rates, but a small amount. We're not running a business, we're running a private foundation educational trust, and we need all the help and support we can get to allow me to continue doing this work, to allow our admins and moderators to be able to be, brought up to the levels that we all are, for me to invest time, and for me to be able to go into teaching full time would be what I'd like to do, to get into the private and get all of this sorted, the equitable relief that we're looking for with regards to this surety, legal bondage, and exiting Satan's carnival. We have developed a universal non-sectarian remedy for all, whereby man claims the world's heritage, the world's resources as our common heritage. That's where the equitable relief comes from, perhaps getting access to the wealth and resources in the forms of gold bar that is stashed in the Vaticano city vaults. Now, initiates, let us look once again at Christ's teachings. Here is another analogy from the heliocentric bibliothèque, KJV 1611 authorized version. Now, when I say that the KJV 1611 authorized version is similar to a banker's manual, a banker's handbook, it's got in there certain analogies into titles and rights and property and inherency, divine inherent rights, and it's very deep, the craftily worded interpretations, interpolations, and the implied meanings and definitions. Santos once said that there can be at least 7 interpretations to each passage sometimes. So the analogies from the 1611 authorized version, when we speak of physical, metaphysical and codes, and the literalists have a hard time dealing with all of this. They study the Bible for 40 years and get no clarity, no remedy, no insight, no elevated consciousness. They fail to find the Christ-like consciousness, the Christ within, the kingdom within, inwardly project, outwardly attract, commanding the universe and its multifaceted flux fields of modality, the Holy Spirit being able to be found within the quantum entanglement of this matrix that we find ourselves, subatomic atom and electron, atom and Eve, or to be processed in the temple for the celebrium, the Sarabrium, to open up the 1,000 lotus petal leaf for enlightenment, and on the pathway from disciple to apostle to prophet, initiates on the path of the hero's quest and journey, no less. Right, John chapter 8 verse 7 to 16, starting at 7. So when they continued asking him, he lifted up himself and said unto them, that he that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her. And again he stooped down and wrote on the ground. And they which heard it, being convicted by their own conscience, went out one by one, beginning at the eldest, even until the last. And Jesus was left alone, and the woman standing in the midst. When Jesus had lifted up himself and saw none but the woman, he said unto her, Woman, where are those thine accusers? Hath no man condemned thee? She said, No man, Lord. And Jesus said unto her, Neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. Then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. The Pharisees therefore said unto him, Thou bearest record of thyself, thy record is not true. Jesus answered and said unto them, Though I bear record of myself, yet my record is true, for I know whence I came and whither I go, but ye cannot tell whence I come and whither I go. Ye judge after the flesh, I judge no man. And yet if I judge, my judgment is true, for I am not alone, but I and the Father that sent me. Now Christ wasn't operating at a common law level there that I've just read to you from John chapter 8 verses 7 to 16, because the common law was black and white, and by the common law rules the woman could have been stoned to death. And Christ wasn't operating at common law. He invoked an equitable remedy which was just and fair. He used love. He said, if you're let he without sin cast the first stone. So if you're innocent and pure, you are fit to judge. If you are innocent and pure and you are with sin, then clear off, because who are you to be able to cast judgment? Christ went against the law of the land. Christ was operating then within equitable terms. Christ was using the maxim, he who seeks equity must do equity. Not that that was a maxim at that time, but to put it into modern comparative terms, those that are with us and have taken our Jedi orientation, equity and trust course will have been made familiar with the propositions of equity and trust law. So he who seeks equity must seek equity. Those that use equity, evoke equity, must come with clean hands. That doesn't mean exactly what it says. What that means is within equity you have rights. Your substantive rights are held in equity. You have to remember that if you're seeking equity, you also have to abide by equity. Those who seek equity must do equity. Remember that the other side will have rights too. If you come in as the plaintiff, or if you decide to come in as the beneficiary and hold the trustee to account for non-performance of a trust, you must remember that the trustee has rights too. And that's what Christ shows you in John 8:7. Not Jesus, but a Christ-like consciousness. When Jesus is operating at a higher level, is referenced as Christ. When he's operating as Jesus, he's operating at a different level. So a Christ-like consciousness, I hope this is all underpinning itself and, cementing itself in. And I hope we haven't passed your saturation point, those on this evening's premiere and replay. Christ was operating with the soul and the spirit of the law. He was operating with an equity. Extra note that we don't need to get into that. So we got to remember man's like Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. If anybody is familiar with Edgar Cayce and his works, and I do believe in the cult film They Live, he is featured on Time magazine on one of the newsstand magazines for sale there. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet. He tapped into the Akashic records and was able to see things on a quantum metaphysical level. He was prophesizing. Research Edgar Cayce, get back to me. I've put down notes here: disciples, apostles and prophets, initiates in the attainment of higher knowledge. The prophets are seen to be speaking to the three lords whilst in the desert. Not all of the prophets, but one of the prophets is seen to be speaking to three lords whilst in the plains of three lords. Okay, so why is the three lords? Anu, Enki and Enlil, to close down, because obviously we have to look at the Bible and its annotations that the world is 5,000 years old and created in such a way in creationism. But we look at history and evidences, and we see that the world is older than 5,000 years. That deception in itself has been uncovered. And then we look at the the sun gods, the star gods, the star people, the Anunnaki, and we explore further later on. So that then cements, along with the finding of Göbekli Tepe, and floods, and the Enuma Elish, from Middle Eastern times, Sumeria, Babylon, Mesopotamia, going all the way back through to 6000 BC to Ahura Mazda, Zoroastrianism. So that's it. That is the proofreading of my latest document and the closing down of Easter, encapsulating syncretism, spiritualism, soul, focusing within Golgotha, the Christ in Jesus, explaining all of that within the existence of Satan's carnival. There's references in the New World Testament where Satan offers Jesus the 9 realms, and Jesus doesn't answer back in the passages of the story there and say they're not yours to give. He says he doesn't want them. I'm paraphrasing. Those of you that are biblical scholars above the level I'm at will be able to quote the chapter and verse. So think about that. There is 2 parts of the demiurge here, good and evil, that are fighting and opposing each other. I'm going to go into Pangu to close down, which is, as I've said, I've looked at the sutras, the Shintos, Buddhism. I am a Tibetan Buddhist myself. I looked into Egyptian, Greek, Mesoamerican, Aztec, Mayans, Incas. We've looked at Australian, we've looked at the Indian poetry, Mahabharata, the Bhagavad Gita, and in Eastern philosophy I found Pangu, Chinese creator god, also known as Pan-Ku. Pangu, giant creator god, born of the cosmic egg in the beginning of the universe, was like a huge black egg floating in the void. Who laid the egg? We don't know. SPL's researchers have so far failed to uncover a cosmic chicken. Trapped inside the egg was Pangu, by all accounts a hairy, shaggy critter. Pangu, the first man, is said to have come forth from chaos, an egg, with 2 horns, 2 tusks, and a hairy body. Some accounts credit him with the separation of heaven and earth, settling the sun, moon, stars and planets in place and dividing the 4 seas. He shaped the earth by chiselling out valleys and stacking up mountains. Pangu, also mentioned as Pan-Ku, is the creator god of the universe in Chinese Taoism. He is usually described as a giant horned dwarf with long hair all over his body. In addition to his 2 horns, he is often a pair of tusks, as well as normally carrying a huge battle axe, not to be confused with sweet little Pingu. Okay, research that yourself as well. So 2 halves of the same entity, ultimately coming back to join back together as one. I've enjoyed that. I do take great delight and pleasure in these writings, interpretations, chats. I'm looking forward to the premiere tonight, about 8 PM on the 25th of April. Welcome. Thank you for your time. Thank you for watching. Thank you for those that are on the replay. Thank you for those that are channel supporters, members of Indiglo. Thank you for those that have joined our private educational community of splspro.com. Thank you to all our admins for all that you do. Thank you to the universe, the cosmic laws. Thank you to love. Thank you to one another. When I thank you, I'm thanking myself. When I thank myself, I thank you. I think that will ding dang do. Just let me check on here. We're all good. Some people have popped in to have a look. I see 3 likes on an unlisted video, so I've only posted this in splspro.com as a special advanced preview, so there's been 3 of you that have popped in to have a quick look. Much love, and I shall see you later for the premiere, and I'll be in the room chatting. So we'll say ciao for now. Much love. Bosh. Thank you. Bless up.